Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first Football Heritage and Politics seminar. We're talking live from Clemson University, United States, and we have our guest speakers joining us from the beautiful city of Bremen in Germany. I am Felipe Bertasso Tovar. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Parks, Recreation, Tourism Management at Clemson University, and also the organizer of this event. This event is truly special for me because after visiting Germany last year for my dissertation, that data collection that was focused on how European football clubs shares or marginalize their past associated with authoritarian regimes at their stadium tours and museums, I was able to visit Werder Bremen. And after being introduced by a friend and research gatekeeper, Fabian Fritz, who is joining us also from Hamburg. He works at St. Pauli. He introduced myself to two great people in Werder Bremen. The first was Christopher Pum. He is a social worker at Front Project Bremen, and I was able to not only visit the museum, but also watch it Werder Bremen beat Eiserberg for 4-0 in a very cold night in late November. I was also introduced to Fabian Nettrich, who unfortunately was not able to meet in person, but he was very, very open to share his knowledge about German football and Werder Bremen during the Nazi regime and in modern times. So for every football researcher that approached German football, one thing, as you're going to see here, didn't escape from attention, which is the political activism that surrounds the local fans, especially from a left-wing perspective. In regards to today's conference, with more emphasis in the last 2 decades, a nationwide fan movement has decided to promote a culture of remembrance linked to the victims of National Socialism on and off the football stands. Such a relevant work, as we will have the opportunity to see this morning in more details, is also part of Werder Bremen landscape. Through a specific view of the relationship between Werder Bremen and the Nazi regime, our speakers today will share the results of their book entitled Werder Bremen Under National Socialism, Life Stories of Jewish Members, which of course covers the history of Werder Bremen between 1933 and 1945. Before introducing our speakers to the audience, so I invite now Dr. Gregor Ramshaw, professor at Clemson University and a sport heritage expert, to share a few words about the relevance of this kind of work, this cultural remembrance work, and of course about the event, the relevance of the event, not only for researchers, but for every fan of football that's interested in this kind of topic. Dr. Ramshaw.
Thank you, Felipe, and thank you very much to our colleagues across Germany, and particularly those in Bremen, who will be sharing their research and findings with us today. You know, when Felipe asked me to provide a few words to begin with, and I got to think about cultural commemoration and how we commemorate the past in sport. And normally we, in most cases and in many cases, we recognize and memorialize and commemorate those wonderful things from our past, great championships or wonderful players or great performances. And certainly right now, Werder Bremen has, and their supporters and their club has much to celebrate, having just recently been promoted back to the top tier of German football. But when I was thinking about this, particularly when we bring this to a context that is relevant for us in the United States, or perhaps for those who aren't as familiar with Werder Bremen or some of the elements of commemoration within German football, is to think that, many parts of our sporting culture and our sporting heritage isn't just the great stuff, the championships, the great performances. In many cases, our heritages and our cultures are also taking place within difficult paths. How do we address, commemorate, and in some cases, unfortunately, ignore some of our more challenging pasts? And I think about this here at Clemson University, which has here in South Carolina, which has a wonderful sporting culture, but even our most iconic sporting place, Death Valley Stadium, that holds 85,000 football fans every Saturday during the fall, sits adjacent to a recently discovered slave cemetery. And it reminds us that even sporting spaces and much of our sporting culture here is tied up with elements and histories that are not particularly wonderful or particularly laudable. And so when I talked to some of my colleagues about this, I said, many of our students and many of us are going to be working with organizations, or indeed are supporters of organizations, sport organizations that do have challenging pasts. And what I look forward to learning from our colleagues in Bremen is to understand a bit about how they addressed some of these challenging pasts, how they confront them, and how they plan to commemorate them. So thank you again to Felipe for inviting me, and thank you to our colleagues in Bremen for presenting their research to us today.
Thanks, Dr. Remshow. So after this short warm-up, we would then kick off the event. So from Germany, we have with us 4 of the 7 authors of the book, Werder in National Socialism. The first is Lucas Bratt. He has played soccer since childhood and is a long-time supporter of Werder Bremen. He holds a master's degree in history and economics from the University of Mannheim, with his master's thesis focusing on the club history of Werder Bremen from 1989 to 1945. Currently, he's working in customer engagement for a software company. And to the book, he contributed the chapters about the club history of Werder Bremen and the biography of Leo Weinstein. Our second speaker is Dr. Marcus Meyer. As a graduate historian, he's a researcher at the State Center of Civic Education in Bremen, and scientific director of the Bremen Memorial Bunker Valentin. He's also a board member of the association Erding für die Zukunft, Remember for the Future. Marcus Meyer has published various essays on the history of Bremen bourgeois, forced labor under National Socialism, and the culture of remembrance. He's a fan of Werder Bremen as well, and regularly visits the Weser Stadium. To the book, he contributed the biography of Theo Eggert. Our third speaker is Kahina Napklug. Kahina is a political activist and punk, and she's against modern football commercialization. She's a former board member of Werder Supports Association, Club Association, very involved in Werder fanzines and research projects about social history from Project Bremen and Queer Football Fans Europe. She wrote the biography of former Werder manager Hans Wolf to the book. Finally, our last speaker, and also responsible for this event today, is Fabian Ettrich. He is a historian and a political scientist who lives in Osnabrück and works in public relations for a business organization. He has already worked on the Fan Project's 2017 brochure about former Werder Bremen president Alfred Ries, and is a founding member and treasurer of the Werder Fan Club, a Hawaii Crew 05 in Osnabrück. To the book, he contributed the chapters about the biographies of Alfred Ries, the Rosenthal family, and referee Hugo Greenback. So this first edition will mimic the 90 minutes of a football match. So in the next hour, our speakers will present the seminar's content, and we'll follow with 2 rounds of questions of 15 minutes each. Participants, you all can ask questions through the live chat, and we will be sending to our speakers when we start with the round of questions. As you might have noticed, the event is entirely free. However, donations are more than welcome to finance a memorial at Werder Bremen Stadium for the persecuted Jewish club members. Bank account information to donate is also available at the chat and the event description. So please consider donating for this wonderful initiative. So Lucas, Marcus, Kahina, and Fabian, the stage is yours. And I truly thank you for coming and give your time to share about the wonderful work that you have done in Bremen and in German and now for the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Philippe. Thanks, Dr. Ramshaw. Dear participants, it's a nice opportunity for us to present our book and research results here at your university. When you have a look at sports structures in Germany, it's a bit different than in the US. We have not so many school or university sports teams, but more self-organized clubs, and especially athletics and soccer clubs have a long tradition in Germany. A lot of them are more than 120 years old. And also Werder Bremen is a very old club. It's from 1899. And the club grew, especially in the 1920s, and became very successful, especially with their football team after World War II. And the club has, as Dr. Ramshaw told you, some championships in their history. They won the German championships, the Bundesliga 4 times, and the National Cup final 6 times. The biggest success of the club was the European Cup final win in 1992. Werder Bremen is one of the most famous soccer teams in Germany, with more than 40,000 members, and today you meet a few of them. Perhaps you know it, there's a connection between your university and our club, Werder Bremen. When Werder won his last German championship in 2004, there was a player, part of the team, who was also a student at your university, the Canadian defensive player, Paul Stalteri. Dear listeners, thanks for the opportunity to present our results and our research about Werder Bremen today. Our focus has been on the transformation of the club in the age of National Socialism. As you know, we had millions of killed people in Europe during World War II. The lethal ideology of the Nazis declared Jews to the evil. Millions of them were persecuted and killed. But it is not well known, also not in Germany and in Bremen, that Werder Bremen had Jewish members. It was the idea of fans, historians, and researchers to reconstruct their lives, not to show them just as victims, but more to show them as humans, as sportsmen, and as engaged people. In Bremen, just like in many other German cities, the initiative for having a look at the club's history during the Nazi time came from the supporters, from the fans, not initially from the clubs, from the soccer association, or from universities. Serious reprocessing of sports in National Socialism started in Germany in the late 1980s and in the 1990s. Also with small steps in Bremen. In the last 10 years, a lot of texts and books were published in Germany about the clubs, the soccer association, the most important soccer magazine in Germany, Kicker, and their Jewish protagonists. When I read a request from the Fan Project, an educational initiative for younger soccer fans in Bremen, for taking part in a research project about former Werder president Alfred Ries, which a name I never heard before, I became part of a group of fans. That was in 2016. A few months later, I got to know Lucas Bratt, and now he will tell you something about Werder's structural transformation in the 1930s.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the introduction. Yeah, maybe we on the slide we currently see the agenda. So I'll basically cover the first part, which is about what happened at the sports club Werder Bremen after the Nazis took power in 1933, and we'll later follow on with a higher overview of the individual biographies of the Jewish members. You see here again the content of our book, which we will present now, and at the end of the presentation, we'll go more into the commemoration culture and what we were able to achieve with our research and with publishing this book. So I've written amongst others the part about the club history of Werder Bremen between 1933 and 1945. So during the time when the Nazis were in power in Germany. This was, as Philippe introduced me, also the topic of my master's thesis at university, actually, also the channel through which I got to write or to contribute to this book. I'm going to try to squeeze everything into 15 minutes, what I'm my overview, but I'd really like to quickly start with what happened before 1933 in Germany and with regards to sports in general. Because soccer wasn't really popular in Germany before, at least before 1919. Werder Bremen was founded 20 years before, so 1899. Back then, we had an emperor, was the German Empire, and hiking was considered as the German sports that you would do. Soccer came from Britain and was not really popular, was not really en vogue. That only changed after the First World War, when we didn't have an emperor anymore, but the first a democratic republic in Germany called the Weimar Republic, where also sports were kind of liberated, right? So other types of sports like football, like in the end also rugby, so sports that came from other countries got more popular. That's also a time when a lot of sports clubs really grew in Germany. There were kind of turbulent times with the Great Depression, end of the 1920s, and finally, in 1933, the Nazis under Adolf Hitler took over power in Germany, and that changed a lot in public life, but also for the sports clubs. Before 1933, sports was mainly done to just to practice sports. We'll see a change in that after 1933. And it wasn't really political. We also see a change in that. That just as a teaser. I'd like to continue. You see below some bullet points about what I'll be focusing on. I can't cover the topic in its entirety, but I'd like to quickly speak about what changed in the community life. So the life inside the club. Or Felipe, if you could go back one slide, just so that I can quickly go through the bullet points. How also the language changed in the club magazine, about the purpose of the club. As I said, it wasn't just about doing sports anymore. I like to quickly speak about the so-called Führerprinzip, and about a quick teaser about the Jewish club members and the so-called Aryan section in the statute of the club. So if you could advance to the next slide, Felipe, now we'll see a piece out of a club magazine. And this is also one of the main sources I had for my research. So that was a magazine that was sent to the club members mostly every month. Since 1910 or so. So there's a long history of the club magazine before 1933 and as well as afterwards. And we see a really eye-catching change there, because the language in the magazine turned to be a lot more political. We can see in this text that the club also used the magazine to position itself, and Werder Bremen specifically in a way of saying that they have always thought in the way of the new, in a nationalistic way in the end. We can't really see that in the sources we have, but this is how the club positions itself. Might have been that there were these kind of thoughts inside the club, but this is the first time that they really position themselves as nationalistic, as a group of people that has always thought in that way. They would incorporate, sorry Philippe, if you go one slide back again, they would incorporate the nationalistic wording in their magazine, and would focus or would present themselves as a group of people that does not only think about practicing sports, but we see this in the last screenshot here on this slide. It says that they want to invest everything. They are a closed group of people who want to invest everything for their highest goal, which is Germany. And you see that they don't only see themselves as a club, but as being part of a larger community, or a larger target or goal. So the language changed in the club magazine. What also changed is the statute of the club. So every in Germany, you can. I'm not sure how familiar you're with the concept of like clubs or registered clubs. Germany, you can, if you're a group of I think 6 or 7 people, you can go to the authorities and register a club. Basically, same procedure for soccer clubs, and you would need to have a statute. If you're going to register, you need to have as an association, you need to have a statute. And this is also one of the sources that we had, right? So we had statutes from before 1933, which, for example, covered topics like who can become a member or what's the purpose of the club. And then we have these statutes also from the time 1933 and onwards, and we also see a quite big change here. And I'd like to go into 1 or 2 examples on this slide. You see the purpose of the club. The statute in the top left is from, as it says, from this year, and it says that the club focuses on the physical and mental education of its members. It's politically and religiously strongly neutral, and is fully based on a democratic basis, or founded on a democratic basis. In 1935, this looks a lot different. It says that the club focuses on the physical and the mental education of its members, but in the sense of the National Socialists. This is what it says down there in paragraph 2, and then it lists the different sports that were practiced back then. So it's a change in the purpose of the club, putting themselves, or devoting the club basically to the ideology of the National Socialists. If you could advance to the next one, perfect. So another change is the form how the club is organized. So before 1933, it was a democratic kind of structure with annual assemblies of all members, and these members would then elect their president and one that then elect their board. And this changed in 1933 when the so-called Führerprinzip was introduced, and power was centralized in one person. And we can see that on the lowest level, so on the level of the clubs at Werder Bremen, the assembly or the members' assembly didn't really have a lot of power anymore. Power was concentrated in the person of in the, it was also called Führer, so essentially leader, if you translate it. And that we see the same structure in the level above, right? So there was a regional president of the football association in northern Germany, for example. And in the end, the president of Werder Bremen had to be approved by the next higher instance, and this went up into the minister for the interior, or the special the person responsible for sports in the government, right? So that ensured governmental control, or control that the Nazis had up until the lowest level, so to the level of the football clubs. On the right, so we see, on the left, maybe just explaining the screenshots here. The first one is from the statute. A screenshot of the statute. The one below is, on the left, you see one of the presidents of Werder Bremen during the Nazi time. And on the right, you see, and this is also a quite important source that we had for our research. After the liberation of Germany in 1945, in the Americans, as well as the British, the French, and in a different form also the Russians, or especially in this case, it's the Americans actually, had questionnaires that every German above the age of 18 had to fill in to be allowed to go back into their work, so to have a profession again. And they had to state what they did between 1933 and 1945. That gives us a lot of information. That gives us, for example, the information what kind of Nazi institutions or societies, associations they were part of. And this is what you see, a screenshot of this questionnaire on the right. This is actually the questionnaire of the person on the left here. So that just as an explanation. And by the way, that person was denied or disapproved to continue with their job. So the next part is here, again, a screenshot of who can, or this time focusing on who can actually become a member of the club. And in this year, we don't see any limitations. We see that the club understands itself as a connecting element between different nationalities, cultures, religions, social classes, and it offers home to basically anyone, independent of gender, origin, color, or skin, and so on. But if we see on the next slide, we see how this was handled in from 1939, respectively 1940 onwards. So if we start in the lower right, we see a screenshot of the Statute of Werder from 1940. And there it says that members cannot be people that are not of, quote unquote, German or related blood. This is, before that, we don't have such a restriction in the statutes of Werder. We see such a restriction in other football clubs, or soccer clubs had that way earlier, but it's obviously a different story to have this in the statute versus how you actually practice restrictions on members. And indeed, we'll also come to that later. We have evidence of one Jewish member who was excluded in 1934 already. So 6 years before this was even put into the statute. So it's a difference having this written down versus how you practice it. The second screenshot here on this slide is from August 1939. And this is a membership form. And this actually, before this was part of any statute of the club, this already requests from applying members to state what kind of origin, if you translate it word by word, in the end, this would mean in the ideology or the language of the National Socialists, it will mean what kind of race the people are of. And obviously, if you would state Aryan, that would be the what was expected here. So we already see a different practice in terms of who can become member in 1939, but way before already, as well as said in 1934, 35, we have evidence of one member who was excluded. Wrapping up my part, or quick summary of what I said or what I think is important. Seeing what has changed, we see that the life inside the club, the community life, has become political. It was not as it wasn't before. At least that's what the sources we have tell us. And what also, in my personal opinion, is quite important to note here, that it had an influence on the everyday life of the people, of the members, right? So the Nazis were there's a word in German there. It's called Gleichschaltung. I think it's an enforced conformity in English. So meaning to bring institutions on the same or force them to conform to the National Socialist ideology. And you can imagine this, that they would set or they would have an influence on political parties. So political parties were forbidden, or in the 2-3 years after the Nazis took power, basically all other political parties were prohibited. So you can see that influence. You can see an influence in terms of who could become a teacher, for example. Only people who were conform with the National Socialists could, without a lot of problems, become teachers, for example. So you see the influence in schools and education. You can see similar things in the media, who could become an influential part in a newspaper or radio. But the clubs, the football clubs, is basically the private life of the people, right? And by actively adapting, assimilating the ideology of the National Socialists, the clubs like Werder Bremen actually help to bring this kind of ideology, bring policy into the everyday life of the people. I think this is to me personally quite something that is a big outcome of the, or is my personal outcome, one of my personal outcomes of this. And looking at the second point, it wasn't just about practicing sports, but it was, so practicing sports wasn't the only primary goal of the club, but the club saw itself as being part of of something bigger, of help. I think I remember the phrase of helping to rebuild Germany. It's so sports is not an end in itself, but it's a mean to achieve something that they thought of was higher. So the lower part of the slide, and this is how I will end my my presentation here, is we see so-called anticipatory obedience. So proactively assimilating to the new political forces. We might also see opportunism, or related to that, strategy of securing the survival of the club. We need to note that there were, before 1933, there were 4, 5, 6 different associations of football clubs. So there were religious, there were an association that mainly had workers class football clubs in it. So these associations were also prohibited. So we can see what the club did, maybe also as a strategy to secure the survival of the club. But obviously, and that's also what we can read from the sources, that it was conviction of individual members of the club, what they practiced in terms of making Werder Bremen political, adapting to the National Socialists. Yeah, and with that, if you could advance to the next slide, Felipe, we would start with life stories of the Jewish club members, which was the main part of the book, where we portrayed Jewish club members of Werder Bremen who were members before 1945, and handing over to Carina now to present Hans Wolf as one of these members. Carina, we can't hear you yet.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Moin from Bremen. Moin is the usual greeting here in the northern of Germany, and I'm quite happy and very surprised that I can take part here in this report. So I had to, my report is on Hans Wolf. He was later called Hansi Werder im Sportverein Wolf, which means something like Hansi Werder of Wolf Sports Club. And so that may show how effective and how heavily his view was, he was viewed in the club and in the town as well. But the problem is that he had started his big career after World War II, so that the main part isn't so interesting here in this case, because I'm showing much of his history before 1945 and afterwards. As we have learned before, the years between 1933 and 1945, or even 1949, simply never did exist for such a long time in Germany. Not in families, not at jobs, not in clubs and associations, and not in Germany and society at all. The German fairy tale started in 1954 when the West German football team won the World Cup final for the first time. And so that was the starting point. that was something like the birth of our nation, a manifesto to the world, a manifesto for the Germans themselves, with the headline "Wir sind wieder wer," which means far more than we're back on the track again. And now what happens before 1945 wasn't a subject in any discussion, even in families. In post-war documentations, the prosecution of even Hans Wolf, and even his former state of half Jewish, which he was no topic, as these kind of categorizations was nothing to talk about. So up until 1965, that was at the time of the Auschwitz Nazi trials, National Socialism was no subject anywhere, not even at school. We even heard for the first time at school of National Socialism in the mid-70s, and as a result from the 1968 rumors we had in all over the world, and expectedly also in West Berlin and in Germany as well. For the DFB, the German Football FA, and all its clubs too, were led by old men until the 1980s. The Nazi era did not take any place in chronicles and discussions. And so there was not any notice concerning the victims as well. Coming to Hans Wolf. Hans Egon Konrad Wolf was born in 1913 and he died in 1982. He was, though he was baptized Lutheran, due to Nazi speech, he was as well half Jewish, and mainly half Jewish, officially called half-breed by first degree. He was a son of a Jewish horse trader. In mid-1929, he joined Werder, and he was, first of all, he was active in each kind of sports you could do at that time in that club. That means fistball, handball, ping pong, athletics, but mainly also football and rounders as well. So that was, and apart from his own sportive actions, he began to work in the club's office. He was chairman of the soccer department and a referee conveners. He wrote for the club's news and became the second cashier. So in 1928, by the age of 15, he joined the German Nationalist Clerks Union, in German Deutschnationaler Handlungsgehilfenverband, a union which allowed no Jews inside that union. And so we come to his professional career. He joined a company, joined Willy Preuß offices, an office supplies company in 1934 as a sales representative far away from Bremen, over there in Pomerania and Thuringia, which is now in East Germany and even in Poland. Customers were mainly civil services and authorities. And after 1933 or 35, those customers more and more claimed certificates of membership in the Nazi party from their trading partners, which he naturally couldn't deliver. And even so, because Wolf seemed to be non-Aryan to all the people, by the sound of the surname Wolf, even with two F's at the end of it. I didn't know that before, but at that time it seemed to be quite impossible, quite necessary to get a non-Jewish name. And so he suffered from getting less and less orders. And so he suffered from depression and something like this. And it was also as dangerous as well. He hardly could avoid to get arrested after denounced at Stolp City Hall, which is in Pomerania. So we had a wee rumble over there, and then could get away from this. And he returned to Bremen immediately and got fired by his company. As he even earned contractual penalties and provisions, which means in summary 3,000 Reichsmark. To compare this with any other sums, he usually earned 500 Reichsmarks plus provisions monthly. his contract with the country was withdrawn then. He was complaining against this, and that was replied by the CEO like this: I refuse to correspond with people like you unless you tell me how to send me back the 1,000 Reichsmark, which we gave you at advance fee and provision. So it went harder and harder to get a new job without a certificate of Aryan ancestry, or he'd get less paid of jobs if he could get any at all. And of course, he got into trouble with Nazis as well. He suffered from treatment at several interviews by the Gestapo and medical examinations by the public health department. He was forced to attend regularly. Due to the Nuremberg racial laws, he was not allowed to get into relations or even contact with, and not to say to get married with, any Aryan woman. Family members got the same treatment. His only sister was treated shamefully, as he said, by Gestapo and public health department humiliations again and again. Several relatives of his father's family got arrested, sent to the concentration camps, and lots of them emigrated. The summary of all these physical and mental pain and injuries cannot be healed at any time, he wrote in his, and now I have to look for the correct or seemingly correct English form. It is the Antrag auf Anerkennung der Voraussetzungen als politisch, rassisch oder religiös durch den Nationalsozialismus verfolgter, which means in English something like that. It's a wide translation. Application for the approval of fulfillments and qualification as political, racial, or religious persecutions by a nationalism, which he wrote in 1950. But apart from this, in the Nazi era, he was good enough for the army, though. And from 1939, especially just a few days before the war started, and on the 25th of August, he was in the infantry regiment 154 up until autumn of 1941, and returning something you call over there Purple Heart. We didn't have such a title here. It was he just came back with a heavily wounded arm. And in April 1940, on the other hand, the Supreme Command of the Wehrmacht, the Oberkommando, decreed to release half-breed people from the armed forces. Exceptional cases were possible until 1942. Then he returned home. He immediately worked for Werder again, sending the club's news to each serving member by Army Postal Service, which was a service that was given by the club in World War II before, and World War I by Hans Jaborg. Now it was his job to do so. And he was playing a football again. He was a part of the last ever team that played before the end of the war and the liberation of Europe. And more and more, because all the others have been gone to the army, and so he was playing in Werder's first team, Werder's best team. But the last match, has to be abandoned before the final whistle due to an air raid. And he lived not anymore in Bremen at that time. He moved some 50 kilometers away from Bremen in rural Brentwede to avoid any contact with the Gestapo. That was not so, in rural areas. On the other hand, he also had a strange episode in his whole life. At the end of at the age of 18 or 19, he sit down and listen. He had joined both NSDAP from 1931 and 32, and the so-called ordinary SS from about 1932 up until February 28 in 1933, leaving both on his own, which was confirmed later by the Berlin Document Center of the US Army. So, okay, and in the late years, the forms Lucas has told you before, all those who applied these forms were covered by other Germans, which yeah, which had to include it in these forms with a couple of names of persons who witnessed or even bailed for given information. Persons helped each other for filling in these forms with required info, good guy or not too bad a Nazi or something like that. And he had such a speech by Adolf Hecht, at that time Vereinsführer or ex-Vereinsführer, leader of the club in in the late 1940s, in the last days of the war. And he was covered for Adolf Hecht had given him his job. He was a professional officer at Bremen Employment Services, and supported Wolf with several jobs, and later covered him up working in Werder's office again. After World War II, it took years to get a decision after the applications concerning all this persecution applications from the German post-war authorities, apart from those being identified as Nazi after checking the denazification forms. Wolf sent in the applications in 1949 and 50, and the whole correspondence went all through the 50s. The final notice of rejection dated in February 1962. His final rejection concerning his separate application concerning his professional disadvantages in the Nazi era dated from October 8 in 1962. The reason was his Nazi membership. Surprise, surprise. He was being active, an active figure in the re-foundation of the club in 1945. All the clubs and associations in Germany had to be disbanded, and post-war membership, his post-war membership card was number 5 in the founded club here in Bremen. For one reason was he could speak English quite better than us. He translated for the Brits and later for the Americans, and he also had a bicycle. He was able to ride and allowed to cross the borders between the different occupation zones. Bremen was situated or was freed from the Brits in 1945 in April, but was given then over to the Americans. They just need an embankment harbor for all the troops which would be down in Bavaria, in the southern part of Germany, and in Hesse and something like that. And it was forbidden in the early days after war to cross the borderlines between different military zones. And he was still riding 50 kilometers one way from Drentwede to Bremen and backwards twice a day. And that was possible because he had the new contacts to the armies, the British and the American, from 1944 and to 1976, and that was the final part here. He gained promotion to one of Werder's leading figures after World War II, becoming famous for being the first managing director for more than 30 years before he was displaced in 1976 for his then old-fashioned methods and edgy decisions he took. Apart from his own sportive actions, I had this before. Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, he then died in 1982, 6 years after he was disbanded. And that was, I think, enough for now of Hansi Werder im Sportverein Wolf. Thank you.
So I will continue with the Rosenthal family, which is a special case because we have had a look at 5 single members of Werder Bremen, and family Rosenthal is a special case because we have a father and 3 sons, all members of Werder Bremen, and not only members, very engaged members in several committees of the club. The father was member of the club board, and his sons in several committees, for example, the tennis committee, or the oldest son very engaged in the communication committee. And he was responsible for the event to the 20th anniversary of the club. And he went to schools and did some advertisement for the club, and Werder Bremen got a lot of new members, also because football and soccer became more popular at the beginning of the 1920s in Germany. The father, Albert Rosenthal, had a paper shop for luxury papers and a publishing company for postcards. And when you have a look at postcards of Bremen around the year 1900, most of them are from the publishing company of Werder member Albert Rosenthal. But although Albert Rosenthal and his oldest son Arthur fought in World War I for Germany, they were imprisoned and were killed by the Nazis. And we have today stumbling stones to commemorate them. And they are really close to the stadium because their house was in front of the Weserstadion in Bremen. So I don't know, every second weekend, thousands of Werder fans go to the stadium, and I think they do not know that 2 of very engaged early members of the club had lived there in front of the stadium. The youngest sons, Herbert and Hermann Rosenthal, escaped from Nazi Germany to Ecuador and to the US. And we have a special case with Hermann Rosenthal because he got support to leave Germany by the military intelligence service, the defense department in Germany. The defense department was part of the Nazi regime, but also a spot of opposition and resistance against the government and Adolf Hitler. It sounds absurd, but it's true. And we have a similar case with former President Alfred Ries, which about him we will tell you in a few minutes. After World War II, Hermann and Herbert Rosenthal lived both in the US for several years. Both were located in New York.
Okay, Leo Weinstein is then my part again. I've written the biography about him, even though I wasn't really meant to do so from the very beginning. But looking back on this, it has been honestly a real privilege working or writing his biography, especially because I was able to get an autobiography that was written by him. He lived in the United States after World War II, and that told a lot about him that wasn't known publicly, I guess, until then. But starting off in 1921 in Germany, when Leo Weinstein was born, he became member of Werder Bremen quite in his early ages, and he was the Jewish member who was excluded from the football club in 1934, 35. The sources are not clear on that. And he was told that he could not be part of the club anymore because he was Jewish. So that was also the reason given to him. He and his family was oppressed. His father's business, he was a tailor, was impacted. They couldn't pay for Leo's school fees anymore. And finally, Leo and his brother were able to escape from Germany with one of the last ships to the United States in 1938. His father stayed or had to stay in Germany, and was murdered in a concentration camp in 1941. Leo and his brother escaped to the US. Leo went to continue to go to school in the US. He had a job at night to finance that. He started with college. Then he had to join the US Army, was sent back to Europe, was operating behind enemy lines, and helped actually liberating the concentration camp in Buchenwald, where his father was murdered a couple of years before. After the war, he stayed for a year in Germany, also because of his language skills. He was he was able to speak German, so they used him in, I guess, for a radio station in Munich. He worked for the US Army, went back to the United States, continued his school studies, became a doctor, and finally a professor at Stanford for French literature. He wrote a lot of books about French literature, but what he also is, and that's based off, a little bit also based on my research. Would be really interesting to hear the participants' perspective on that, or if you know the name Leo Weinstein in the context of soccer, because my research says that he was a pioneer for soccer in the United States. I know soccer has had a hard time with hockey and basketball and American football. But he was promoting soccer at the university in California. He was he went to soccer World Cups, so I think 8 soccer World Cups as a for TV stations, for sports newspapers, and was in the end it pioneer for soccer in the US, and honestly speaking, quite a remarkable biography. On this, on the slide, on the picture, you see him on the very right. He's the coach of the team, and the picture is taken in Stanford in 1953, I guess it says there. Handing over, Fabian. Hugo Greenback is yours, probably.
Yes, Hugo Greenback was a referee, and he became member of Werder Bremen in 1920. And we know that he was a part of the referee committee of the club in 1933. He should be deported to the concentration camps in 1939, but he got tuberculosis, so he had to go to the hospital, and there he get to know his later on wife, Käthe Grünberg, and both married in 1940. But just 1 year later, they were deported to Minsk in Belarus, and both were killed. But members of their family are still living. They're living in New York, and we got in touch with them, and they gave us some pictures of the family of Hugo Greenback, and we were able to use them in our book. So that was, really amazing.
So, Theodor Eggert, it's my turn. Hi, I'm Marcus. I make it kind of brief because Karina said a lot about the so-called half-Jews. Theo Eggert also was a so-called half-Jew. Keep in mind, this is a Nazi decision to make someone a half-Jew, which is from a Jewish point of perspective completely nonsense. But that's racial ideology from the Nuremberg laws. The special thing about Theo Eggert is, and now it comes to my original profession, he was imprisoned in a camp that was called a labor education camp. And I'm working at a German memorial site remembering slave labor during the Second World War. If I would take my camera off the monitor and put it out of my window, you would see the second largest bunker in Europe, which was built by about 10,000 slave workers between 1943 and 45. Now, it's a memorial. We have a lot of memorials in Germany. Most of you might know Bergen-Belsen or Dachau or maybe Sachsenhausen. But there are a lot of small sites really not known all over the world or even all over Europe. But for us, it's important to show that the Nazi crimes happened everywhere, not just in the big concentration camps, but everywhere. And in case of Theo Eggert, he was imprisoned because he was a half-Jew, and he was deported to this camp in the part of the city called Bremen-Fage. And he had to stay in this camp for 4 weeks. After 4 weeks, he was deported again together with all the other half-Jews from Bremen to other camps more in the middle of Germany. But the important thing is, when it comes to talking about the Nazi crimes and the Nazi era to young people today, we are always looking for something to connect. Thanks for the picture. You get only an idea. It's hard to imagine this building just from the picture. It's an astonishing building. But to tell the story, you need connections to the daily life of school kids. And in a normal situation, a school class would come to the memorial site. Most of them not interested at all in the topic because they think it's so long ago. Why I'm here? Why it's important for me to know about this history? And if we open up our sessions with the school kids and say, by the way, Theo Eggert was one of the prisoners, and Theo Eggert was vice president of Werder Bremen post-war, you get their attention because they don't get why someone who was the vice president of Werder Bremen could ever be in a Nazi camp. And due to this irritation based on this small historical fact, you get their interest and they start asking questions. And that's what we do. We try to give parts of the history of this place and parts of the history of the Nazi era that connect with people today. And if we can do that, if we can build this connection, you get young people interested in the whole history of places like this. And that's why I was so interested in the story of Theodor Eggert. And that's why we put so much effort, there's not really much information about what he did in Bremen-Farge, what he did during his time in the camp. But the fact that he was in the camp and that he was a prominent member of Werder Bremen helps to open up the minds of younger people to the history of national socialism and all the complex thematic of forced labor and war crimes and everything that's connected to this topic. Yeah, so I won't talk much about Theodor Eggert, but that's why we were part of the book and the project and why we profit from it. Back to you, Fabian.
Thanks. So our last biography is Alfred Ries. He's perhaps most popular Jewish member of the club, and his biography is also a bit controversial, discussed in Bremen and in Germany. Alfred Ries became a Werder member when he was a child, and at the age of 26, he got president of the club. He worked for a coffee company in Bremen, and when the Nazis took force, he went to Munich and to Czech and then to Yugoslavia. And he had so the support of his boss of the coffee company and of a colleague, and they helped him to get a trading license for Eastern Europe. And with this license, he was able to move and work and trade in Southern Europe. Especially after in the normal passports, the Jewish star had to be in it. So the connection of his former of his earlier boss and colleague were to Walter Frischmuth, this guy. He was employee of the military military intelligence service in Bremen, and I told you about this institution when I talked about family Rosenthal, especially about Hermann Rosenthal. And Walter Frischmuth helped Alfred Ries to get those trading licenses, and with it, Alfred Ries survived World War II in Yugoslavia, although he was imprisoned several times. After the war, Alfred Ries came back to Bremen, and his trading documents from the military intelligence led to the accusation Ries could have been a spy for the Nazis. But documents in the German military archives and also in the National Archives of the United Kingdom and the United States have shown that this absurd accusation is unproved and not plausible. We found lists of spies working for the military intelligence service in Bremen, but there was no Alfred Ries on the lists. But what we've also found were other examples for Jews who got help from the military intelligence service in Bremen. And although his parents were killed by the Nazis, Ries stayed in Bremen. He became Werder President again after World War II, was engaged at the management board of the German Soccer Association, and worked for the Foreign Trade Office in Bremen, and after it became diplomat for Germany in a final step as ambassador in Liberia in Africa. And in his retirement, Alfred Ries came back to Germany and became again Werder president. And 2 years after Werder won the German championship in 1965, Alfred Ries died in Bremen. And Alfred Ries was also the starting point for our book project. when Werder fans saw the grave of Alfred Ries in 2016, they arranged a plaque for his grave. Perhaps you can turn one chart further. And when the fans arranged a plaque for his grave, they did also some research about Alfred Ries, organized an exhibition about him, published a Ries brochure for young soccer fans, and motivated local politicians to name a square at the Weserstadion about Alfred Ries. And after publishing our book in March of this year and a dialogue with a local project, Stumbling Stones for the Father of Leo Weinstein, which were presented by Lukas, Hermann Weinstein, and for the referee Hugo Greenback and his wife, have been installed in Bremen. The installation of a memorial for all Jewish club members is another goal of our project group. And so thanks a lot for all your attention, and yeah, feel free to ask us about our book, our research, and everything you wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian, Karina, Lucas, and Marcus for the great presentation. Several interesting facts about the work that has been done in Germany, especially in Bremen, to bring back to life the memories of several victims of National Socialism, and specifically associated with Werder Bremen. We are waiting for questions in the live chat, but I also have to say that the book is available for those that knows how to read in German. Right, it's available, if I'm not wrong, in Amazon, but you can Google as well. It's a wonderful book, I can tell you that, and it's very recommended for those researchers that want to start investigations on this difficult heritage of National Socialism in German football, and how football fans have been very active to not let those memories die or stay in the past. So as you all see here, these pictures shows several examples of a culture of remembrance that is very present. I will ask Dr. Gregor Ramshaw if he has any questions, so we can start this first round of questions if he has something. And meanwhile, we wait for questions from the audience, and I also have some questions. But thanks a lot for the presentation. It was really great. We will have this presentation recorded, and we're gonna post on YouTube so everyone will have access, even for educational purpose. If you want to share later. Dr. Gregor Ramshaw, the word is with you, if you have.
Thank you very much, Felipe, and thanks to everybody who presented on this very interesting and very important topic. I think and I think perhaps my first question is maybe in terms of sort of a broader question about perhaps German football culture or German sports culture in terms of talking about or confronting some of these pasts. And I think one of the things that I think would probably surprise many Americans who you know watch or know something about German football is that you know, for many, and I'm not sure this is the case with Werder Bremen, but that football is but one of the sports in some of these larger clubs. So they'll have, you know, it would be like the Dallas Cowboys have the football team and a basketball team and a handball team and a chess team. So the idea that there's multiple sports sometimes housed within these clubs, of which football is probably the most prominent. Do you know of, or are you familiar with, if there's, and again, I'm not sure if this is the case at Werder Bremen or at other clubs that you're familiar with, has there been this sort of discussion around the the Nazi period through other sports, or has it primarily just been through football, or really only through football? So has there been any other discussions of any other sports that are, you know, within some of these clubs?
Feel free to answer.
Yeah, maybe I can take the first shot if that's okay for the rest of the round. You're actually right, Dr. Ramshaw, that it's also quite common for clubs in Germany to to house many different kinds of sports, and that's also true for Werder Bremen. So there's a multitude of different types of sports that and departments inside the club, and that was also true for the time back then, because that's also the interesting question, right? What kind of sports were practiced back then? There are some smaller there were some smaller departments back then for rugby, for basketball, I know of, but I wouldn't know if they would if there were any specific attempts to commemorate or to work on the history, especially the one between 1933 and 1945. But what I know is, and that's also one of the famous or the most popular sports back then, is gymnastics in Germany. So gymnastics was very popular, especially, and I missed to name that, during the German Empire. So before First World War, but continued to be, and there was always a rivalry between gymnastics and soccer back then. And I know that there were specific clubs that were only that would only practice gymnastics, and I know that some of these clubs have also worked on their past. So I can speak for gymnastics. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues can speak for other sports, but that was, it's also a question which sport was popular back then, and that was definitely gymnastics.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I guess I have one more question. Maybe I'll throw it back to Felipe here. Obviously the relationship between supporters and the club are very different in Germany than they are in the United States, not only maybe in terms of culture, but in terms of approach. The idea of a supporter rather than maybe a consumer. We tend to see those sorts of things more in the United States. Do you have any advice or any thoughts on how how perhaps American supporters could maybe confront or get their clubs to confront some of these pasts, and were these efforts supported by the club organization itself at Werder Bremen? Was there resistance to it? Could you talk a little bit about that? Perhaps the advice part, and then maybe that, how those sort of relationships with the clubs in terms of acknowledging these pasts, how those played out.
Perhaps I can say something concerning this. I can't hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
Okay. We plan to write a second book concerning the positions of those who were the perpetrators in that time, and that seems to be a bit difficult, because you might reach any relatives of those who did it, and but those relatives are sometimes always in the club as well, and doing the high jobs there, and so we might smash down any porcelain like that. So it's quite difficult to do so, but we are not afraid.
Anyone else who would like to answer this question? Lucas, Marcus.
Yeah, I would add something. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but at first this book project was kind of ignored by Werder Bremen because they thought, okay, there are some nerds writing about some. They didn't take it very seriously. But at the point they realized that we are doing serious stuff, there was suddenly some support because a lot of different clubs had done something similar before Werder did. And in nearly every case, the fan base was the who brought it to life. It was never the clubs themselves. It was never the German Football Association. It was just the pressure from the supporters. And I know a story from a colleague who wrote a book about a Jewish president of another famous German soccer club, and that club was hesitating because they were concerned that the idea of a Jewish president could do some harm to their economic relations to some countries in the Near East. You get the idea. So it's a struggle because, as Karina said, dealing with this past of National Socialism was originally a project of the civil society, not of the states, not of the universities, not of researchers. It was the pressure of the civil society, of people mainly dealing with their parents, basically. You had parents, you knew they were in the party, they were in the SS, they were whatever, but not talking about. So they raised questions. That's the big topic of the movement of '68 in Germany. And this became only a kind of official history after the reunification of Germany. Then the official politic took over. Hey, look at us, we are so brilliant on dealing with our past. Let's go around the world and tell everybody how this should be done. So that's kind of cheesy because it was never the idea of official politics to do this. And this leads somehow to your questions. What can American supporters do to do something else? I have not much knowledge about. I had two experiences. One was I was once in New York seeing a basketball game, and I was astonished because the last 5 minutes everybody was in was watching the game. Before they were walking around, eating something, talking about something. But the last 5 minutes, I thought, okay, that's kind of what we have in our stadiums. And that's what you said, the difference between support and consuming, by the way. And I have no idea how you can get something like that because it's so deep in the German and in the European history, because so you have it only with soccer in this amount of supporter thing. And that's because of the special history of soccer or football in Europe. You have it in Spain, you have it in England, you have it in Germany, but it's hard to export that. Yeah, and for example, there's one episode of The Simpsons watching a soccer game, and the commentators just don't get the idea of the game. So yeah, it's a very special European thing, I think.
And I think, just to couple onto that, it's been interesting here as the soccer fandom has become more mature and certainly is playing off of not only the politics and the approaches to fandom and support in Europe, but Latin America as well. And I think it's just specifically Latin America. There have been some of these debates sort of coming about, of course, within the MLS, which is a franchise model. You sort of have Latin American, South American styles of support, but the politics are a little crunky at times. And we saw this a bit around the summer when the abortion decision, the Roe versus Wade decision, was either addressed by some clubs or completely ignored by some clubs. And some supporters brought banners to the stadiums and others had them confiscated. And so there is this sort of very interesting element around that, but it's a little bit, as you say, a little bit more difficult in a consumer model as well. Thank you. I'll be quiet now. I appreciate everybody's questions and thoughts here and your presentations. Thank you.
I think Fabian and Lucas would like to say a few words as well. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yep.
Perhaps I would like to add something. What is special in Germany? Fans are different groups. You of course you have consumers, you have those who are visiting the stadium every second week, and you have also club members, a lot of club members, 40,000, and you have forms of dialogue with a club board. So there's no big distance. You are very close to the club, so you can bring in your critiques, some discussion, and you are in touch with the club board all the time. And perhaps the distance is larger in the United States, but perhaps it's an opportunity to talk to the management of a club, wrote them, tell them your critiques. So perhaps it's a way to make this distance a bit closer.
Lucas, you wanna share something?
I think my colleagues have covered it perfectly. Thank you.
All right, I do have some questions, and I will try to be concise here, because we're just reaching 1 hour and a half of the event, but I think it's worth asking a few extra questions. So we've been saying that the importance of football fans being the leaders of this movement, of this cultural remembrance movement in Germany. To what extent this collective work of fans in Germany have been contributing as well to peace building between fans? So let's say historical rivalries in Germany, do they got together? They overcome those rivalries when they're talking about the National Socialism past. Also, to what extent the cultural remembrance supports other anti-discrimination projects that we normally see in Germany against sexism, against xenophobia, against racism. So are they together? Can we say that? And finally, also in this matter, in terms of the management aspect, to what extent this cultural remembrance helps football clubs in Germany to be more transparent in all parts of the club management? I'm not talking about here only regarding the past, but let's say they're now more transparent in decisions regarding transfers, player transfers, decisions that are going to affect fans, let's say in their match days experiences. So trying to sort it out like these 3 questions into one, but feel free to answer in the best way. These 3 questions I think relates to all of you, and then if you have more time, we will come with more questions.
perhaps I can start. In Germany, you have not only fans of the single clubs, you have also fan corporations, like in Europe, Football Supporters Europe, for example. You have in Germany Pro Fans and others, and there you have a dialogue between fans of different clubs, and they are also talking about commemoration. But it's true, it's a very small group which is very engaged, and you have also rivalry between the clubs, which is still continuing, but you have also very engaged groups which are getting in touch, not only when their teams play against each other.
Maybe I can continue. It's a kind of development in Germany. Since the Bundesliga started in 1963, we had more and more growing numbers of youth who go to the football grounds. And we had, through the decades, some different kinds of fan cultures. When I started in 75, 76, we had such small groups, fan clubs, who orientated themselves to the American motorcycle rockets, and also in the behavior and the clothes and something like that. In the 80s, then came the skinheads to Germany, and everybody wore bomber jackets and Doc Martens and something like that, jogging trousers. And since the 90s, it's the ultra thing coming from Italy and the Mediterranean as well. You can see what happened through all these times in a political way. In the 70s, it was, they call themselves quite unpolitical, though they are open to the right, but they won't confess what they do. And in the 80s, it grows more and more to the right when they say the skinhead culture is something Nazi culture, which it wasn't, never in the main part or in the original part. And in the 80s, it's going to be more and more to the left. In the 90s, when the ultras came on and the focus, and it's also the number of fan clubs who emerge. In the 70s, we have also quite an attendance of about something between 9,000 and 22, 24,000. And now the grounds are fulfilled with some 80, 60, 70. And in Bremen, we have quite a small ground with about 42,000. But it's all packed each and every weekend. And even the fan culture is increasing. And so we are, which is the word I've been looking for. Nowadays, we try to, and we dare to get into contact with the club officials, with the media, with police and something like that. We had the fan projects established in the 90s. Even Bremen was the first fan project ever worldwide, I think. And so we have discussions here and dialogues. And now I decided to quit my fan career after 40 years. And but I'm closer to the club than ever before. And it's not the club itself that is the reason for me to go away, but this kind of modern football I don't like. It's just this commercial thing that makes me not even sad, but angry. and therefore I have to go. But that's my personal thing. But I watch most of, or lots of people of my age are going elsewhere now, going to amateur football clubs. The number is increasing. We have here in Bremen, we have an old rival from the 30s to the 50s, which is the Bremer SV, BSV. And they're down in the fourth grade, in the fourth tier. But all lots and lots of old supporters are going to these clubs because it's bratwurst, it's beer, and it's fun, and no commercial things such as okay, whatever you wish to buy, and it's do-it-yourself merchandise, and this is what we had in the 70s as well. There was no merchandise, and all we had to do and had to wear, we did it ourselves, and that was the reason. Some kind of romantic, of course, but yeah, that's the thing.
I would like to add something to a question about other forms of discrimination. I think this, talking about the Nazi past, was very important to make these topics important for a club and to make them a point of a club identity, to be anti-racist, to be gay-friendly, etc., is now either real intention of a club or a nice part of a public relation. It depends on the club, but nobody would. Every club needs to be anti-racist, gay-friendly, and deal with Nazis. It's a huge problem to have Nazis in your stadium. You have some clubs still having them, but I think they're not so much clubs meaning this for real. One club is, for example, St. Pauli. They started with it. I think Werder is real with this, but some clubs, or the majority of clubs and the majority of organizations, is still refusing the idea of sport is connected to politics, which is weird, because if you go with a tournament to Russia, the officials would say, yeah, it helps to change the society. That's politics. But if you say, okay, then when we are in Russia, let's say something, they say, no, please, no political comments during such a tournament. And if we would be serious with this past and with everything anti-racist, anti-slavery, this World Cup in Qatar could not be played. So you have this. It's in the big picture. It's a kind of we lie to ourselves. It's a business, as Karina said. It's a business. You have to pack your stadiums. You have to sell your T-shirts, and nobody would go over some frontiers if it's dangerous for your business. So you have this ambiguity in the idea of how big do you make the question of what means the past for the present. Some clubs do, some clubs only use it for the purpose and for commercial reasons, I would say.
It's really fascinating, Dr. Marcus. Lucas, Fabian, Karina, I would like to now give the word back to you for final words, and then we'll wrap up things here. It was a fantastic morning for us here in the US, and I assume another fantastic evening for you guys in Germany. Yeah, I will pass the word now for Fabian for his final remarks.
Yes, thanks so much, Philippe, for giving us the opportunity to talk about our research and the book. And thank you for the discussion. I hope those who joined your seminar and our report got some new information about Germany, about football, about commemoration in Germany, and perhaps someone of your participants get some new ideas, perhaps to take some points in American society and also in the dialogue in sports.
Thank you, Lucas, Marcus, Kahina. Feel free to.
Yeah, maybe if I may continue, I honestly also really appreciate your invitation here, and I think this exactly shows that we are on the right track, or we did something meaningful, something that is of interest for other people. We've also presented this book to fan groups at Werder Bremen, for example. So we see a lot of interest, and this, confirms us in what we do. So thanks a lot for showing us that there's also interest across the ocean for this. And Fabian said maybe one or the other gets interested in working on this. I can really recommend this as a topic for any thesis in university. It's it makes it a lot easier if you write about something that you also have a private interest in.
Yeah, and I think feel free to contact us on every other need you have for next seminars, whatever. I think we are all happy to talk about the book, because we think it's an important work we did, because these people are not forgotten anymore. And we'd like to spread it as far as we can, not for our personal purpose, but for the memory of these people who were treated so badly from their own people. So thanks for the invitation, and feel free to contact us again, I think.
Yes, of course. They said it all. I say it, but I have to add something else. I'm also a member of Queer Football Fans Europe, and this is an association based in Germany, but also with members from mainly Switzerland and the UK and the Netherlands. And we always try to get new members. We are open for supporters clubs from all over the world, and we are working on different issues, such as what we can do concerning the World Cups in Russia and recently and now in Qatar. And we had some meetings before the Euro 2014, 16, I don't know, in Poland and in the Ukraine. And there we got into contact with a queer supporters and football club as well from Kiev. And the woman who told us what they have a difficult situation over there, and it was hard to hear that what happened now in the war. And I'm still in contact to her. Now she flew to Poland, and it's always something we have to discuss. If there's any queer supporters club or any single queer person who wants to contact us, yeah, maybe he can write to me or to the whole gang here. Look at Fabian's address, and maybe we can forward this. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your invitation. It was quite a nice thing to have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karina, Marcus, Fabian, Lucas, and Dr. Remshaw for being with us. Was really fascinating, all the knowledge that you have shared with our audience and today. So we definitely will have a second event. There's lots of good topics to go further and deep, and it would be lovely to see you guys again in another event. I really appreciate one more time the collaboration, especially from Fabian, that was my contact to talk with other authors to make this happen. And I know that the knowledge that you share are going to now be used by many universities, by many researchers, and many clubs and fan bases around the world that might be able to change their cultures as well and look to the past in a different way, and making an impactful change in their presence. With that said, I once more appreciate it, and I expect you all in the next edition of the Football Heritage and Politics Seminar. Thank you.